He goes on to say, unless we enhance quality today, we can't hope for growth tomorrow. Who is this CEO? His name is Watanabe. Katsuaki Watanabe, and he is the CEO of Toyota Motors. Because you see, Toyota has moved past General Motors because of Toyota's obsessive focus on quality. My dream, and here I believe I speak for our presidents, and frankly our legislators, because they're starting to talk about it too, is that one day we can have a serious question about quality. My dream is that one day we can have a serious discussion about how to raise graduation and retention rates. And that I can go around and ask each of our board chairs, what is your graduation rate today on 6 years? And that you would know that. Now I know we've tried to do this, but the truth of the matter is, without stable financing, without a stable platform, we cannot. And that's one of the reasons that we have the worst ratio of students to faculty in this country. Without stable financing, we cannot enhance quality. We cannot maintain access to the growing ranks of students who want a university education. So today, as members of the Board of Governors, you have an opportunity to step up and exercise your fiduciary responsibility for quality and access to this state university system. That's what we're doing here this afternoon. 30 years ago in Miami, where I cut my teeth, I learned a Spanish saying that applies. Zapatero a su zapato. Cobbler to your shoes. So let's get to the shoes. We have options to consider today, and I'd like to identify those and share with you a perspective on those, as well as some suggestions for the Board of Governors' action. I want to focus on 4 areas. On budget reductions, which, as Madam Chair has pointed out, we are going to most certainly be taking a minimum of 4% to your base, as much as 10% this year. 4% we project again the next academic year, and possibly as much as 10%, hopefully no more, we can go that. 4%, as you know, is $100 million, 10% is $250 million. So we could be looking at hopefully no more than a $500 million cut to the base of this state university system over the next 2 years. We'll talk about tuition, governance, and then enrollment. First, to budget reductions. There are several principles that we ought to strive to maintain. First, we should try to keep our current retention and graduation rates where they are. We have a system-wide graduation rate on 6 years of 62%. By the way, it's not bad, given the kinds of challenges that we have faced in this system with yo-yo financial management over at least the last decade. So my request to our boards of trustees would be that however they should choose to cut the budget, and largely many of those issues, I believe, will be up to board chairs and presidents and their respective boards, that we ought to strive to maintain current retention and graduation rates. A second principle is that we should focus a system budgeting process on a process that emphasizes quality instruction and timely graduation. We know that increasingly nationally, coming out of the National Conference of State Legislatures, which is the body that Senator Lynn has played a leadership role in, that will be the focus of our accountability, among other issues, graduation rates. I embrace that. I know this board embraces that. We've had continuing discussions about that, and we're ready to go on those performance-related approaches. What about action for boards of trustees? First of all, obviously, consider hiring freezes and budget cuts. This includes travel, state-supported travel for faculty and staff, except in those areas directly related to student support and safety. We've had prolonged discussions in Virginia. We shouldn't give up on our responsibility to keep our campuses safe, and we certainly shouldn't give up on the importance of providing counselors, mental health, advisors to our students. So we'd like to see those areas held harmless as well. Our police, our public safety. I know who's sitting to my right and to my left, so I have to be careful with that. We also hope that in your budget cutting exercise, you will continue to maintain a commitment to the statewide workforce priorities, namely teaching, nursing, and high-skill, high-wage areas. It seems to me that if we're going to maintain this commitment to nursing and teaching in particular, that those areas, if they are priorities for us, should be held harmless in any cuts that might be taken. A second recommendation, and this came directly out of our consultation with university presidents, is that we ought to probably review and clarify authority to seek legal relief from existing obligations. If we go to a 10% budget scenario, budget cutback scenario, that becomes real, I promise you that we will be looking for ways to reduce our legal exposure in a variety of areas. So this is something that we need to clarify. Another area that's important for us is that we would like our institutions to consider program efficiencies through the consolidation of administrative support, through consolidation of program and course offerings, and through academic research and service program closing. This is an obvious initiative that probably needs to be strongly considered at this point. Another area that our board will have to look more at, that certainly was raised in the Pappas report, is to review branch and regional campuses. And you should consider closing off-site locations with low enrollments relative to resources expended. Expand the number of complete degree programs and general education courses offered via distance learning through consolidation of existing low enrollment programs. We've already actually started that initiative through trying to find ways to take advantage of the human resources we have in the state university system as well as in the community college system to improve the availability of less commonly taught languages to our students. They're going to need Chinese. They're going to need Farsi. They're going to need Portuguese. The world is changing rapidly, and we have not kept up with our foreign language instruction. Encourage the development of graduate, professional, and continuing programs that can pay for themselves or generate surpluses through tuition or other revenues. That builds off of one of our governor's suggestions. In some respects, you could view that as a privatization of some of our programs. There may be market forces that would allow for that. Truthfully, it's time for us to look at that seriously now. And then finally, and I think it goes without saying, but I think it's important to put this up, we would leave it to the local boards, but we would expect that all senior administration salary and performance bonus considerations would be put on hold. Madam Chair, that is a time. There are other issues that we will have to address as it relates to budget reductions, but those are the principal recommendations that we have particularly directed to our Board of Trustees in this category. Would you like for me to continue, or do you want to have a discussion around it?
What is the feeling of the board? We're going to do this in categories. Would you like to have this discussion or hear the complete presentation?
Hear it all because they relate.
Excuse me?
Hear it all, they relate.
Yes, yes, sir.
Continue. A second area of importance obviously concerns tuition. And here we have two recommendations. First, this again comes out of a Board of Governors discussion. We should consider restructuring graduate and professional tuition where market conditions allow, so that tuition covers a higher percentage of the program costs. There are perhaps several areas that we could do this almost immediately that would enable us either to transfer resources to other areas, other programs, or at least to reduce costs that we are supporting in those graduate and professional programs. A second area, and this would require board action, is to raise undergraduate tuition and fees for the spring of 2008 if budget reductions exceed 4%. This is an area I'd like to return to so that we may have a discussion about that. A third area is governance. And here, we need to develop and publish general guidelines that do govern all of our actions not related to appropriations. And we have prepared for you a draft of the document that we at some point should discuss, not today, but at some point in the very near future, that will clarify respective roles and responsibilities from a Board of Governors viewpoint. The second item in the governance area relates to the declaratory action by Senator Graham and Representative Fry, and that is that we should support that initiative. That would require board action. Finally, as it relates to enrollment, I think this goes without saying, and I know the boards are discussing this locally, we should eliminate non-critical low enrollment courses and increase class size for all faculty. I think that's been happening even over the last couple of years. Class sizes have grown, and that's one of the reasons we do have the student-faculty ratio where it is. And then finally, as a result of the 4% budget cutback, and this would require board action or governor's action, I am recommending that we freeze freshman enrollment growth at current funded levels statewide for a 3-year period, beginning with this spring and extending through the next 2 fall enrollment periods. In the context of this enrollment freeze, we would hold harmless community college AA transfers. As Senator Lynn has aptly pointed out, we have a superb transfer program, articulation program. Our universities have worked very hard on that. Many community college AA graduates and AS graduates are looking forward to enrolling in the state university system, and we should hold spots open for them. So in essence, I have identified 4 different areas that our board should consider in the context of the challenges that we have. And I am asking for action to be taken by this board in 3 of those areas, if you will, focusing on tuition, on governance, and on enrollment. That concludes my presentation, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Before we have open comment, as I said, we have 4 chairmen here. We have Chairman Clark from the University of West Florida, Chairman Morgan from the University of Florida, Chairman Taylor from the University of North Florida, and Chairman Walsh from our university here, University of Central Florida. Many of these initiatives that the chairman talked about today would be managed at the trustee level, and we want you to know we recognize that. This is statewide policy without micromanaging your issues. Would either of you like to comment on that? Just want to be respectful of the governance system and your responsibility. Okay, our board, comments, questions of the Chancellor? Governor Edwards.
For sake of getting this in front of us, I would move the approval of all of the recommendations.
Is there a second?
Second.
Now for discussion,
I just have a question.
Governor Parker.
I have a question as it relates to the recommendation regarding tuition. And I think it indicated, or you indicated in your presentation that the recommendation was that we raise the tuition, raise undergraduate tuition and fees for spring '08 if budget reductions exceed 4%.
That's correct.
I guess I want to tie that into, my first question is, at this point, aren't we already there? Aren't we already at a 4% reduction? I guess I'm missing a point there, so aren't we already at a point of making that decision? I guess I'm interested in the wording of that particular recommendation, given to where I thought we were at this point.
We know that we will be taking a 4% budget cut. We believe it could be larger. We will have a sense about that, if memory serves me correct, on August 3rd or 4th when the Revenue Estimating Conference comes in. In all likelihood, it will be greater than the 4%. And we then would, if it were greater than the 4%, my recommendation is we move to raise tuition.
So is it that you're suggesting that we say, today make a decision that if it turns out that it is going to be a reduction to exceed 4%, then in that instance, we will go ahead and agree to raise tuition at this point?
That's correct.
Okay, so not that we wait until we see what the answer is.
No, it's very important to our students that they understand how their finances could likely change in January. Clearly, we could wait until October to make that decision because the course registration will begin. But what I'm concerned about is that we not cut back service so much that we reduce our ability to graduate our students who are currently in the pipeline. So I think it would be prudent for us for our planners, our university planners, to understand how they could take those budget cuts and under what scenarios. And the sooner they have a sense of that, I believe the better off our state university system will be.
Clarification.
Yes.
Are you recommending in that recommendation there that the tuition be increased by 5% or some other percent? I mean, what is the recommendation? You just say increased.
I believe that 5% makes a lot of sense under the current circumstances. It still will not close the gap in revenue that will have to be cut, but it is a good faith effort on our part to keep our tuition affordable even while we are raising it.
Governor Edwards, Governor Duncan.
I just wanted to briefly comment on my reason for supporting the Graham Frye Declaration. It's not a knock on the governor who committed in his campaign that he would oppose tuition. It's not a knock on the legislature who actually provided us our 5%. We got to get an answer. This is one of the things that I've noticed in my year and a half on this board. We've talked about governance and our various problems, and until there are answers to these questions, we'll never know what the best way in which to go. So I support this solely for the purpose of getting it resolved once and for all who has authority in this area. If the court rules for the legislature, I'm happy as I can be. If they rule for us, well, I'm happy too. It's not a war, it's just a question of we've got to get these questions answered. And the same thing is going to apply in a lot of the other areas of governance, which as this board matures, the answers have got to be there. So I support this litigation, not suing friends or not fighting with the legislature or fighting with the governor. I would hope that the legislature and the governor would agree. We need to get these questions answered. That's why I supported it. I don't know any other way to answer the question except to have the Supreme Court tell us.
And indeed, I agree with Governor Edwards. We need answers. It is very uncomfortable to be in any type of litigation with people who are your friends. And they are my friends, and they are our friends, and they're friends of the university system. This is for clarification, and it's just not a comfortable position, but it's clarification. For more clarification, on your recommendation, was it for 5%? As he said, I don't see that. If the budget reductions exceed 4%, was it for a 5% tuition
I
increase?
just asked that.
Yeah, but I don't see it up there. I want it for
I think there's a
clarification from
general
the,
understanding about 5% and how that would fit into the broader budget challenges that we have. I believe there's consensus around that number. Clearly, it's not as much as we would like,
I want to
but
make
it
sure
is
it's your
consistent
motion.
with the understandings that have been forged over the last couple of months.
I want to make sure that Governor Edwards, who made the motion, because that would be in reinforcing the legislature's approval of tuition. This is an important point.
If I may, with the second, amend that motion to say not to exceed 5%.
Not to exceed. Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Does the second, you
Second.
approve that?
Second.
Yes, yes, all right. Governor Duncan and then Governor Marshall.
I guess first of all, I want to say how much I respect and all the efforts, Chair Roberts, that you have put to try to avoid litigation on this and the hundreds of, probably thousands of hours, most of us don't even realize, trying to work it through. But I guess I'm still a little confused, and I guess my personal preference would not be to take all three of these as one motion, because I think they have some different issues and concepts, and I'm a little still not sure about how they all fit in together. But where is the suggestions on the efficiencies and the improvements in some of the costs fitting into this dialogue? Because I'm having trouble suggesting that we would kind of preconcede to raising the tuition without even hearing the results back of that. What's the understanding on that, I guess?
Thank you, Governor Duncan. I think that I think it's a very good question. It's a question that a number of you raised at our mid-June meeting in Miami. We have a graph perhaps we could show to you that will begin to get at that question. I would like to share with you the proposition that we have been very efficient in the state university system over the last decade at least. And even with the budget cuts and the underfunding that we have still continued to produce. So if I could, let me walk you through this table. It's total funding per full-time equivalent full-time equivalent student history and current situation. Or I'd like to rename this as death by 1,000 cuts. This is the yo-yo financial management that I have been talking about. As you can see, we were at a high in roughly 1990 of $14,000 per FTE. We have dropped precipitously over the decade of the 90s. We rose a little bit during the latter part of the 90s. We plateaued, and then with 911, we once again took significant budget cuts. And if we continue with the process, we started to rise again, and I think that's consistent with Representative Beeler's position, that the legislature has attempted to be responsive to us. Still in all, with the projected budget cuts of either 4% or 10%, we will be at 4%. We still will not have recovered early 2000 levels of student funding. And if we go 10%, we will be at the lowest we have ever been. I would submit to you that in and of itself, that is a statement about our efficiency. There's also another graph that we have prepared for you that shows that, that's actually another one that I like the SREB data, if we have it. That in fact shows that the change in just benchmarking ourselves against our southern neighbors, you can see that Florida is at the bottom. In essence, we have gone backwards in spending per student into negative during these last 5 years. In spite of that, we have maintained and enhanced our graduation rates so that they are still fourth highest in the SREB region. Other cuts that I would like to talk with you about. The state university system, starting with the year 2001, academic year, took a $40 million budget cut prior to 911. With 911, we took another $110 $68 million cut out of our base. And then in 2003, about $40 million. So in essence, you can see why we have the worst student-faculty ratio in the United States, because in essence, on a funding per student basis, we have gone backwards. And this gets at the issue of quality. That's in part why, Governor Duncan, I believe that faculty had carried on their backs the burden of access and quality without a commensurate state university system investment. In terms of efficiencies as well, you well know that with devolution, we inherited systems, enterprise data systems, that were legacy systems from the 1970s. It cost our university system roughly $50 million in recurring money that was unfunded to put these systems into place, and in non-recurring, our estimate is anywhere from $200 to $250 million during that same period. Again, unfunded. And in the context of these very significant budget cuts we took throughout this decade.
Can you expand on that? I'm not, the recurring part of that, where is that being driven from?
The recurring is being driven by the need to put into place staff members who could run these systems at each of our institutions, because largely our human resource, our student system, and our financial system were all driven centrally, either out of Tallahassee or out of joint data centers. And with devolution, when the Board of Regents ceased to exist, the management, those systems were declared essentially inoperative, and we were all tasked with the responsibility of coming up with systems to manage, in a 21st century context, all of our data. And we did that without any support, additional support, that would have been necessary to underwrite the cost of that. Where did that money come from? It came out of enrollment support.
I mean, that's not, actually, that wasn't my question on those. I mean, I remember voting for moving to the PeopleSoft system at USF when I was on the Board of Trustees, and yeah, I think we were also under the impression there was going to be some significant improvement in our ability to manage and to have efficiencies and do different things. And I guess I'm still questioning why are we saying that is a duplication that's not producing results? Or I'm still, that 50
Well,
million.
what I'm suggesting is it's probably a duplication that we could have avoided had we had a more, if you will, focused or centralized approach. But I would like to remind you that during that same period, we took in an additional 55,000 students. So I would submit that given the context of budget cuts, given the implementation of ERP, and given the enrollment growth, that we have done very well in terms of our overall efficiency.
I'm sorry, may I just one follow-up to that? I guess I'm still unclear of the things that you were going through on the efficiencies. It seemed like some were falling in our court, some were falling to the trustees, or were all of those falling to the trustees? I mean, how do you see that coming, and how does that come back to us, and how are you pretty confident there are not more system-wide efficiencies that we should be discussing and helping deliver in light of the budget cuts?
I think efficiency is a shared responsibility between our local boards and the statewide board. And I think as we get more comfortable with each other, you'll see a lot more efficiencies being realized. Having said that, my sense about those efficiencies largely is that they will be on the margin, given our continuing commitment to access and given the likelihood of growing demand for access to the state university system. We'll have to take those efficiencies just to stay even. There are still efficiencies that can be gained.
I thought we were voting not to increase the access.
Say it again.
I'm sorry, I thought we were being asked to vote to not increase the access in this same vote. Was I missing what?
Only freshman
On the
enrollment.
enrollment
Only
increase?
freshman enrollment.
That's
So-
different.
So
You're
I
saying-
don't understand how that's connecting with efficiencies.
He was saying that the efficiencies were gonna, be needed to continue the enrollment growth, and I was questioning what.
There still will be enrollment growth at the upper division level. And my sense about the graduate level is that there will not be decline. I hope there's not a decline, because the state needs graduate students and graduate degrees to stay competitive in the global economy. But in all likelihood, will hold our own in terms of graduate enrollment. But certainly, we would expect to continue to grow simply as a result of the increasing numbers of community college graduates that we hope to receive over the next few years. So that's really what I'm talking about.
Governor Edwards and then Governor Marshall, he just wanted to make one
Just
comment.
a comment for those who noted the 89-90 year, which I believe had the highest state support per FTE in our history. That was also the year that our state university system was ranked 6th in the nation. So for those who don't quite understand the correlation between dollars spent and quality, there is a perfect example right there.
That is well said, absolutely. Thank you, Governor Edwards. Governor Marshall.
Madam Chair, I felt more comfortable about the motion before the stipulation was added that we not exceed 5% with any increase in tuition in 2008. I don't see why we place that restriction on ourselves in this far in advance. We don't know what the economic circumstances will be in Florida in the spring of 2008. We can't be sure how successful our budget reduction efforts will be. There are a number of imponderables there, and I would hope we wouldn't have to exceed 5%, but I just don't see why we place that restriction on ourselves at this point.
We could change that when the time comes, but that's kind of a feel-good comfort
Well, I mean,
situation.
you could amend it to come back if you determine that it's appropriate and put whatever kind of restriction on it at the time. If you want.
If you look at the numbers, if we even have a 4% cut, you'd have to increase tuition on the neighborhood of 25% in order to cover a 4% cut. So if we're looking at a 5% increase, we're not even going anywhere near resolving the cut. We're just putting Band-Aids on the cut.
And we are following the lead of the legislature, who had
Correct.
many committee meetings, worked very hard to come up with the 5% number. Excuse me.
I guess as a part of the same discussion, I guess what surprised me about this though is that we were asking for a 5% tuition increase even before there was any cut in the budget. So I guess my concern or question or query isn't there some consideration of increasing tuition by 5% whether there's a 4% reduction or not? It's like, should we tie those two items together? Because there's a need before the 4% reduction was even considered.
Governor Parker, I think you'll recall that in August, we had a sustained discussion about tuition.
Right.
We chose not to raise tuition, not to recommend a raise in tuition or raise it, in part because we understood that a rational financial management circumstance would allow us to present a budget to our legislature, our governor and our legislature, and to hope that that budget would be fully considered. Once the governor and the legislature then consider it and make a decision, then in a rational financial management context, we as a board would take what was appropriated, try to determine if there was a gap, and figure out whether we would use tuition to balance that gap or to close that gap. So we, in essence, decided not to ask for a tuition increase. Now, I am very grateful that the legislature decided to try to help us. They recognized we could not get where we needed to be.
And Chancellor, I'd like you to comment that the governor did fund our enrollment in his budget.
I believe that's correct. But again, we're not, I mean, what I'd like to avoid is was it the governor or the legislature? Really, it's about all of us. And the challenge that we have, until we can make a determination of where we're going, is that the yo-yo financial management makes it impossible for our local boards, our presidents, our mid-level managers in the academic trenches to do any serious financial planning, and it takes quality off the table as a concern. So the inflection point that we have today is to reclaim the ground on a stable and rational business model that we could work collaboratively with the governor and with the legislature so that we can move our institutions away from a yo-yo financial management, and so that the citizens of the state of Florida can have adequate grounds to understand what their tuition will be, and so that our academic planners can know how many courses they are going to be offering before the students are actually in the classroom clamoring for more.
But then, Mark, if we follow that logic, then it seems to me that we shouldn't make a decision today about a tuition increase if the logic is that we want to wait to see what the cuts are going to be so we can see what gap we need to fill in. Because in following the comment from Governor Marshall, it seems that do we want to put ourselves in a box when if we follow our logic from last August that we want to see just where we are in the gap, then maybe we should wait and we figure out exactly where it is that we're going to be with the reduction, and then we're going to come back together in August and make a determination then about how much we need to increase tuition if we need to at that point, and then we can avoid the yo-yo that we're suggesting. Right now it seems that, and that, I'm just following the logic, and I just kind of want you to comment on whether or not I'm making sense or maybe I'm missing something in the proposal that you're suggesting.
I think that you're making sense. It's a choice that our board would make. I want to underline what Governor Chase pointed out, just to give you a benchmark. If you were to make the decision to try to restore to our operating budgets that full $100 million, you would have to recommend or make the decision to raise tuition by 25%. That would generate, for every percent of tuition, that will generate $4 million, which is really testimony to how low our tuition is. And so if you would like to close the gap by half, then you would have to raise the tuition by 10%. 12.5%, pardon me. So, that gives you a sense, Governor, of where we are, and it's really the board that has a fiduciary responsibility to figure out what is the bottom line on quality. And so I would leave that to the board's discretion. The reason that I have recommended, consider, or raised, just to make it a statement of intent that tuition is going to go up reluctantly, and that out of respect for concerns over cost and recognizing this is a hard year for all Floridians, that we would do our best to cut our budget, to trim the inefficiencies, while at the same time giving ourselves a little breathing room in terms of trying to get our students in and out of the state university system with a degree that has some value.
But we need to be respectful to our citizens, the families who are planning for their children, and not scare them with a 25%. That is absolutely a fact. But I don't want anybody to walk away today and say the Board of Governors recommended in any way a tuition increase that high. That's unfair to families who are planning, who are nervous, who are concerned. So we have to be careful when we have this discussion that we're not frightening people that are trying to plan for their families. Do you agree with that, Chancellor?
Yes, ma'am. And Madam Chair, just for the record, with the tuition increases that we have taken this decade on a per credit hour basis, our tuition has gone up $26. Even with the 5%, 3.5%, 5%, 0%, the total amount that our tuition has gone up is about $26 a credit hour in 6 years. Now, I recognize that's a lot on a 15 credit hour or 12 credit hour basis, but again, it shows you some of the efficiencies that I think we've taken, and at the same time, how low our tuition is compared to national benchmarks.
And absolutely. And as this discussion moves through other meetings, we'll discuss financial aid and how we're going to protect the families that depend on it.
Well, may I just, in that context, I'm glad that you raised that. Clearly, we believe that the universities would and should, were we to raise tuition, make sure that a portion of that increase is directed at financial aid, and we have that, of course, in the draft accord that we have sent out.
And the presidents enthusiastically accept that. All of us recognize that there are families that depend on financial aid, and we want to help them work through that process. Governor McDivitt. And then
I'd just like to speak to the various aspects of the motion, and then maybe make a suggestion. But I think, it's very, I am so frustrated having spent 4 years on this board, and every meeting we have to come back and try to determine what we can do that doesn't violate a statute, but yet allows us to perform our fiduciary responsibility. And I, as a lawyer, continue to be very concerned about the fact that we're getting less and less able to meet our fiduciary responsibility because the cloud is over everything that we do. Now, having said that, I can appreciate everybody's points of view. I mean, I recognize the legislature's responsibility. I worked for the legislature for the first 12 years of my professional life. I have every amount of respect. I've been in the shoes of the staff there, and so on and so forth. But on the other hand, we have to sit here and make decisions that are very difficult to make when, in fact, you don't have the support of those institutions that ought to be supporting you. Because what we need to do is to be worrying about, to go back to the Chancellor's first word, quality, access, and affordability. We can't have all of those when there's so much confusion here. And I really think if we were looking at us from the outside, it would be embarrassing, rather embarrassing. But put that aside too. We got several things here that we're addressing. I was the one who started harping last meeting about the need to look to efficiencies in the system and within the universities. And some of my buddies out here took umbrage because they recognized how much they had already cut and made do with. And I wasn't suggesting they hadn't done it. I was suggesting we needed to talk about what they had done. And I think we've done that. We've spent this interim period and we've identified all of the areas that people have had to do at each of our institutions to be able to move ahead and still maintain graduation rates, retention rates, enrollments, and all of the other things, and quality of their programs and so on. But there comes a breaking point, and I think the breaking point came. I've been very impressed with the various news releases from the institutions indicating the various things that they're going to do now to address not only the fact that they didn't get the 5% tuition increase, but the fact that they're going to begin to take these cuts. And as when you're now piling on, it seems like. And, while I heard, so I guess going to Governor Parker's point here, it seems to me if we're going to consider authorizing a tuition increase, that perhaps we ought to authorize the up to 5% tuition increase regardless of whether the additional cut is 4%. Because we've already shown that they've had to cut and cut and cut and cut and cut before the 4% and then some became a reality. But that's not the motion before us, but maybe we ought to think about that. But the second thing is, I want to go to some of the things that were said about this lawsuit. First of all, this isn't an adversarial proceeding. This is an effort on the part of some citizens who have an interest in this topic to declare their rights. I would put it in the category of a friendly suit, because you don't have to go out and hire experts. You don't have to go out and start screaming and hollering. You just have to lay out the two sides and let the court make the determination. So to me, this lawsuit is not about tuition and fees. In my mind, the tuition and fees could become secondary in this lawsuit if we could resolve the remainder of the governance issues. To me, there are governance issues which are much more significant than who is responsible for tuition and fees. It is an unfortunate thing that the way that suit was drafted, so much of the rhetoric in the beginning, which is not even the claim for relief, dwelt on tuition and fees. It's count 2 we ought to be looking at. It's very short, and it only talks about the constitutionality of the section in general. And there are any number of things that I could sit here and tick off that I think need to be addressed by the court. I'm not going to do it. I think that those things have been covered by our chair and the various other people, our professional lobbying staff, our lawyers and the people who have lobbied the legislature. There are things there that if they hadn't been in that governance bill which was adopted, I wouldn't even consider joining in this lawsuit. So it's not about tuition and fees to me. Maybe it is to everybody else, but certainly not to me. Because if we could resolve the other things, the issue of tuition and fees would take care of itself. But the fact of the matter remains that if you're going to fund our university system in a way that we can achieve accessibility, affordability, and quality, the money's got to come from somewhere. It either comes from the state, it comes from grants and other kinds of private donations, or it comes from the students themselves. And we have to have a healthy combination of all of those things. And we have probably, I'd like to see a graph up there if you had it, about how we stand on our tuition rates for out-of-state students and for graduate students, because we're probably about to price them right out of existence. And it would be a disaster if we had a system that did not encourage high-quality graduate students to come and participate in our high-quality programs. It would also be a disaster if we did not have the diversity of other state students coming to our university in order to take advantage of those programs that we have that have national reputations or otherwise. And so the burden has really shifted for the universities to be able to provide that opportunity, because we're not getting the full funding from the state. And I understand why. There's only so much money to go around. But we're also not able to deal with the issue of tuition for in-state students in a way that it's fair and predictable and will allow families to plan and all of those things. So though all of this stuff is a lot of rhetoric on my part to try to say that we have to solve the issue of governance, and that we have to be in a position that we can strike an accord with the interested parties. I would love it if we could all get together here in the next several days, the next month, if the legislative leadership and the governor's office and the universities and the board of governors and all of the interested organizations, if we could somehow get together and strike an accord on how we would proceed, I'd be happy as a clam. But we've got to take a stand somewhere, and you know, that's kind of my opinion about it. But I hope I don't have to wake up tomorrow and read in the newspaper that if we were to vote to join this lawsuit, that it's all about tuition and fees, because it's not. It's about the issue of governance and how we and the boards of trustees and the presidents of the university are able to plan, utilize efficiencies in a system, and to make this a very top-tier system, not just one institution here and one there and maybe one program here and there. But right now, we're not in a position to do that. And sorry for speaking so
Well said. Thank you very much.
Well said.
Well said. Governor Stavros.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've not had the privilege of being on this Board of Governors for 4 years as Governor McDevitt. I'm the newest member, 6 months, and I have found the Chancellor, the Chair, the Board of Governors very dedicated to do the right thing for the students of Florida. I think that's key, and that's what's most important in all of our minds. I can tell you that I have worked for years with presidents of the universities, the provosts of universities, and I recognize the ability and the responsibilities they have. So let me talk a little bit about responsibilities. First of all, I have a good friend, had a good friend who's passed away, Jack Eckert, who spoke at one time at one of my meetings for the Florida Chamber that I chaired.
someone asked him, Mr. Eckert, what do you owe building 4 drugstores to, at that time, 1,400? He said, I'll give you the answer in one word: timing. It was the right time. If there's ever been a right time for us to settle this issue and get it going for the university system, it's now. The legislators are outstanding. They recognize their responsibilities. And is their responsibility getting more and more intense? Yeah? Let's talk about the budget cuts. Let's talk about state agencies being told to start thinking about a 10% cut in their budgets. That's a big cut. We have not had the funding that we've needed. You've seen that, you've heard that from the chancellor for years. The state universities get more students and not more funding. How do you fund the new students if you don't have the funding? And so here we have the responsibilities of the state university presidents fighting for funds. Here we have the legislature having to come up with new ways of revenue. You tell me how the legislature is going to get more revenue in the state of Florida when the taxes are, the state sales tax are getting less and less. So here we have a problem of less funding. How do we get more funding? The presidents are being told now, here you've got to consider best ways for financial operations, talking about, that's strictly good purchasing procedures that I've heard today. And I'm an ex-purchasing agent. You've got to look at the best ways to conserve on purchasing. That's part of it. We're asking them to budget reductions, hiring freeze, talk about the regional, the branch and regional campuses. This is a big responsibility for these presidents. So we have the president's responsibilities, we have the legislative responsibilities, all having to come together now to determine how to solve this problem. It's time not to just talk about this. We have to come up with solutions. Now, you know, let me say this. An article was written in the St. Petersburg Times saying that the suit tuition battle heads to court. And then they make some quotes. This is not a time to be adversarial, as was mentioned. It's a time for cooperative spirit, working together with the legislature, the governor. The governor made a comment when he took office, I don't like labels. We're not liberals, conservatives, Democrats, or Republicans. We're Floridians. And I think this is what we, as Board of Governors, as a legislature, as the presidents of the universities and staff, have to consider what's best for the Floridians, the students of Florida. Here it said, for example, one of the legislators, one of our leaders said, I don't think voters were trying to turn the Board of Governors into the fourth branch of government. This lawsuit is nothing more than an attempt to get unbridled tuition increases. God help our students if they win. I haven't heard that with the Board of Governors, an unbridled increase in tuition. It goes on to say, for example, and this is, I think, so amazing, when they formed the Board of Governors in 2002, then Governor Jeb Bush filled the board's 14 slots with mostly Republican allies, and the board delegated much of its power to the individual university boards of trustees. It also continued to let the legislature set tuition. We're not fighting each other. I mean, I just cannot get that across to the point that the only way to solve this difficulty, we have this problem, when I took over as chairman of the foundation at Florida State University, the foundation was a laughingstock. They couldn't get anything done. And so the first thing that we did, we called the provost together, the president, the deans, the boosters together, said, we're working for one university here, let's work together and solve the problem. And we raised $300 million. once that started, it continued on because the next campaign raised $600 million. And we're talking some money here. The same thing at USF. We got everybody working together. If we don't work together, one of our presidents who's sitting here said, I think the legislature, the governor, and the board can work this out. We have to. It's just a shame we need a lawsuit to do it. I'm not for a lawsuit. I'm for solving this problem. I'm for getting funding for our presidents and for our universities to take care of our students. Are there programs that we can cut out that we don't need? The other responsibility I'm going to tell you, and I haven't heard anybody talk about this responsibility, are the students' responsibilities. As a member of the Florida Council 100, we go to a national committee on higher education, and we're told out of 100 ninth graders in Florida, only 53 students graduate high school. Of the 53, 32, you've heard this, 32 start college or community college. 24 students are still enrolled in the second year, and at the end of 3 years of community college and 6 years of university, 14 graduate. 20% of the students who start higher education drop out. That's a responsibility that costs money. So here we have, and of course, one of our new senators, who was the superintendent of schools in Okaloosa County, recognized that his county was 27th in graduates. He found out what was wrong. The state of Florida was not funding technical education. So what did he do? He put technical education in the schools. He gave them the ability to be certified, and that county went from 27th to number 1 in the state of Florida in graduates. There are responsibilities here that the Board of Governors have, that the presidents have, legislature has, students have. And the only way to solve this problem is for us all to work together. And I go along with what Sheila said about cooperating and being together. This is not an adversarial thing we're talking about. We have capable presidents, capable universities. We have great universities that should be greater. And so I'm sorry I got on my soapbox on this, but as the newest member of the board, I had to express myself because I don't envy Sheila going through this for 4 years, talking about this, and there are other boards, other governors, as well as the chancellor and the chair, who have been so intent in trying to solve this problem. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well said. And now we will hear from the students, right?
Yeah, I was actually in class 2 hours ago, which is unbelievable. But
Did you drive fast?
drove really fast, probably too fast.
It's a comfort.
Well, I've heard a lot of great stuff today, and I'm very proud that I think we've got some really great ideas on the table. Well, my question relies on is some of the information that was provided today. For example, this yo-yo finances and things like the cooperative spirit. You know, me personally, I see that, you know, we have 3 major players in the room, and all 3 have shown a dedication to higher education. We've heard some things, and, you know, we know we're in tough times, and students recognize those problems as well. But, you know, we have a governor that's, you know, passed the differential tuition bill. We have a governor that's, you know, told us he's open for discussion, is looking to make those improvements. We have members of our legislature here today, tracked down here, and I met them in Tallahassee. Before I could get one question out, they've already asked me 20 about how we can improve, and that's encouraging. And then we have a board of governors that get together in a matter of no notice to make sure that we can talk about all these things. Now, what I would love to see, but you know, I'm the student, I don't know all the logistics behind it. But I love the idea of us all working together, deciding on an overall goal, as basic as this might sound, having a long-term strategic plan, a business plan between all entities, and overall just trying to get to the major goal, which is to help students with, you know, more faculty, help students get more advisors, And I was wondering what the barriers we have on the logistical barriers on being able to do that, especially with some of the importance that we talked about, parents being able to predict what their child's tuition is going to be in 3 years when they get there, or 4 years when they get there. So that was kind of my question. I know it's kind of long-winded.
Do you want to reply, or should the commissioner next?
It's up to you, Madam Chair.
I do think that us all working together is very important. I do think us meeting together is so important. I believe that all of the